James Williams, Director of Programs with Meth back. Let's get him on straight away. Mr. Michael Becker, come on down.
Hey there.
Michael, it's early with you, fairly early with you, 8:15 in the morning. It's 8:15. It's positive late afternoon, evening for you usually. You've probably done 8 hours work by now. But thank you for joining. Apologies for running a little bit late, but I think particularly the last couple of sessions will have set your personal session up very, very nicely indeed, because there are two angles here. There's myself as a private individual. I want to know that the organization or the business that's interacting with me really is the organization or business that they purport to be. So it's knowing your sender. But then again, if you are an organization of any type, shape or size, no matter where you are, you want to be sure that Michael Becker really is Michael J. Becker. So you need to know your customer. And at the heart of all this is personal data and identity. And Michael runs the personal data and identity side of things at Meth and manages the working group. And if there's one thing I learned at last year's digital transformation event, it is how personal data and identity links with the whole world of messaging and the whole world of the wider area of telecoms and IoT and indeed my mobile payments. So here to tell us about how important personal data and identity is, why you should put it at the heart of your digital transformation efforts, no matter how big or how small, it's Michael Becker. Michael, take it away and a very warm welcome. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. And how do I share my slides? So I've got slides on the screen.
You have,
there we go.
There we go.
All right. Perfect. All right. So let's jump right in, have a lot to cover. And I want to start out with this idea that, like, what is digital transformation and what are we trying to accomplish here? I mean, so when we think about digital transformation, you know, let's think about the ultimate goal as a business. It's to generate value for your business. It's to create efficiency for your business. And it's ultimately to reduce costs, essentially create a model so that your business can sustain. And then all of those kind of efforts will inform your business model. And according to the Gassman Group, you know, there are, you know, commonly 55 business models that companies are applying. I really encourage you to go check them out and look at what's going on. And when you're looking at, therefore, when you're considering all of your elements of digital transformation, you want to be thinking about digital transformation in this context and then making decisions around the who are we serving, you know, what are we doing, what value proposition are we providing those that we serve, how in fact are we doing it, and then what value are we're generating for the business. So that kind of sets the stage of what we're going to be talking about, because personal data and identity really infuses every aspect of this concept of your ability to make and manage your business models. So I'm structuring this presentation in kind of essentially two parts. What do you need to know and what do you need to do? So let's start with the what do you need to know part. And I'm going to summarize them all and then I'll go through them in more detail. You know, we are presented with an $11.7 trillion market opportunity, and that's what you really need to know. Data is you know, in total, one of the largest economies in the world, the ability for us to manage and use data. With this opportunity, there are significant risks, as we've just been listening to in the last number of sessions. You know, there's more to data than you realize. That the tsunami trigger that is data was triggered well over 100 years ago. The fact that there are signs of disruptive change everywhere, that the rate of change is exponential, and that the connected individual, this phygital being, that both my physical experiences and my digital experiences, is waking up. And we want value for our interactions with society, but we also want to be private in certain private, and I'll define privacy in a minute. We want to make sure we're secure and we want to have control. And then likewise, we all need to be prepared for this rise of the personal information economy and the actions that we need to do to move forward. So let me summarize these steps as briefly as I can. In regards to the tsunami alarm, it went off about 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago, actually. And particularly in the United States, that alarm was in 1890 when Chief Justices and Warren Brady's wrote the first legal precedents in the U.S. that we have this idea to the right to privacy. And what they were realizing is that there was this newfangled technology, the camera and the audio machine, that could take a picture of me and record my voice and then have that information be redistributed without my knowledge or control. And that really freaked them out a little bit. And so they wrote this paper that you have the right to privacy. And that arc has been evolving, as I'll explain in a bit, you know, since the 1890s in the US. And here's this kind of evolutionary arc. And we can, we only have 30 minutes today, so we can go into great detail about this on a future basis. But if you think about it, from about 1890 to 1990 was what I'll call the Internet Zero. And what I mean by that is this: we were really thinking about the vision of what it meant to give people the right to privacy, to control over their data. And in fact, in 1946, there was a gentleman that was a data scientist that was coming out of World War II named Vannevar Bush, who conceived of this idea of a mimics machine that would give people control over their identity and personal information. And then, then when the internet evolved in around the 1990s, we start entering in this Internet 1.0 stage, this information age. And at this stage, we are now starting to leverage the power of information. And it was in 1996 that a gentleman by the name of Kenneth Loudon proposed this idea of the National Information Exchange Marketplace, that we as individuals should be able to have control over our data. That wave lasted for about 20 years, when around now 2010, AI, machine learning, and all of our technology started to converge, that brought us into the platform age, the API age, where we move beyond the information management, the infrastructure of managing information, to the methodologies of efficiently exchanging that information. And it was that time that we started to realize that this idea of this personal information is actually a currency. It's a luxury good. It's the new black oil. There's all of these different terms that we can relate to that. And this platform age really drove the industry for about 10 years. And about a year, 2 years ago or so, we started to slowly eke our way into the tokenization age. And the tokenization age is where we're going to start cryptographically imbuing trust within the internet, and fundamentally change the models forever. And one of the key things I want to point out to you in this illustration is 100 years, 30 years, 10 years, and I'm going to argue maybe about 5. Right. So we're seeing exponential change in the way the models and markets are working on. So if you move away from this and this idea of digital transformation for your business, you don't have a lot of time. You need to start preparing now and engaging and interacting with these fundamental shifts and changes that are happening in the market. And one of the biggest changes is this idea of the awakening consumer, this phygital being that is connected to their physical and digital lives. And the MEF has been doing some wonderful research for the last 8 years in looking at consumers' sentiments at the intersection of privacy, personal data, and trust. It's the Consumer Global Trust Study. We just released the 8th study last month, and we did a consumer cohort, a U.S. student cohort of that study, which was just related last week. So I encourage you to go to the MEF website and check that out and get a sense of what it means to be this awakening connected individual. But to really get a sense of what's going on in the context of being a connected individual, research is showing us that our digital footprint actually happens around about 6 to 8 weeks after conception, will grow exponentially throughout our life and carry on after our death. And to put this concept of us eking our way into this digital world, we need to understand that we will be interacting with an IoT device by 2025 about every 13 to 18 seconds of every moment of every day in our private, public, and semi-private public experiences. What that means is we'll be leaking elements of our personal data and our identity out every 18 seconds of every day. So it's critical that we figure this out. And as we've been seeing, and as we've heard from the previous sessions in today's dialogue, consumers are getting concerned, and rightfully so, from the hackers, spammers, leakers, and just the unknowns that are out there in the market. But you as a business should be concerned too, primarily. And I love this quote from WPP, that by 2030, we're no longer going to tolerate the business models that actually look to monetize our phygital self without us having some say in the game. And that's really what we're talking about today. And the signs are already there. The signs are there from consumer sentiment, like the MEF studies. The signs are there in the reaction of major corporations like Apple, who are putting privacy as a core fundamental of their product offerings. One of the challenges is that, and the approach Apple's taking, is they're making privacy a luxury good. So we need to, a whole conversation can be had around that as well. But there's just tons of things that we need to be talking about in these signs. And there's just an immense number of language and rhetoric and concepts that are being thrown out there in the market. To help simplify this discussion, I want to boil it down to the fact that there are 3 primary actors in the marketplace today as you're considering digital transformation. You have individuals, enterprises, and public institutions. And they're all looking to do private and public engagements and then civic social engagement together. And when we look at this concept of individuals, remember, we're not just talking about people. individuals are humans, groups, enterprises, public institutions, and our things, our smart things, our connected devices, my phone, my connected car, etc., is an individual too. And then very quickly and quite soon, they will be making autonomous choices on our behalf, much like the self-driving cars. And they'll also be making commercial autonomous choices for us as well. When we're thinking about personal data and identity within our organization, you'll often hear this term identity and personal data. I personally don't believe there's a standalone thing called identity per se. What I believe is that there's a concept called identity management. And what the process of identity management is doing is helping you as an enterprise and helping me as an individual manage a unique subset of personal data to which we call identifiers, whether or not that means my email address, my username and password, my IP addresses, my biometrics, my DNA, whatever that might be. And so when you're going into and you're considering this idea of personal data and identity within your digital transformation efforts, really remember it's all about managing personal data. And then in the case of identity management, it's about securely managing unique aspect of personal data, which allows me to manage my identity or my identifiers. And let's remember, when you're doing this identity management, it's a spectrum from I have no idea who you are to with 100% assurance and that I know who you are. And then as you're going through that spectrum, you need to really think about the nature of your business and what's appropriate for you. A lot of businesses don't necessarily need to know with 100% assurance who I am because they can take on the risk if they get it wrong. Some businesses absolutely need to do, especially like banking and telecoms areas, getting to as close to 100% assurance as possible for identity resolution is absolutely critical. So these are things to be thinking about in your business. When we're looking at data, the other thing that you need to realize is my data is not just about my data. It's also about my data, me as an individual. I have a certain concept, a subset of data about myself. There's your data, which is the businesses that I interact with. There's everybody's data. That's all the public record data. And then there's this concept called their data. This is the data that's produced, mined, developed, organized by social media networks, credit monitoring systems, data brokers, etc. And when we look at the research, what we find is people are really fine with this one-to-one relationship between my data and your data, the personalized, trusted engagement I do with my brands. Where they get really frustrated is they don't like it when brands interact with these third-party players, and they have really no understanding of what's happening with this every data, public data record. And again, Mozilla at the My Data conference last month in Finland gave a really interesting keynote on that. We do need to realize that when I'm interacting with other companies, my data is often infused with other people's data and the company's data. And so again, it's not as clear as saying I get to own my data and you get to use XYZ data. There's often a lot of gray there that we need to navigate. And so that's something that we don't have time to talk about today, but we certainly can do later. And Ian Henderson has a wonderful article on that. He discusses about this. When we think about and we want to prepare for this digital transformation and what's happening in industry, I often use this analogy called the meeting of the waters. And what you're looking at here is a satellite picture of the Amazon River and the Rio Negro. So you have the Amazon River coming into a confluence with the Rio Negro. And when these two rivers meet, they don't actually merge because they have different speeds, temperatures, and densities. And so what this means is these rivers will coexist in the same riverbed for nearly 6 kilometers or 3.7 miles. And I use this as an analogy, and this idea of a water confluence is quite common in nature. And I think the same thing is happening in our digital world. We have our traditional organizational centric approaches to personal data and identity management, everything we've been discussing that primarily throughout the most of the day, coexisting now in a new people-centric approach. And in this organizational-centric approach, we either tend to use data as an economic asset. This is results from a MAS study earlier last year, or we look at it as a social engineering tool. And from this, we are trying to drive value. We're using marketing. We're generating customer experience. We're looking for operational efficiency. And as we've been talking about the last few sessions, we're looking to mitigate and detect fraud. But then on the other side of the river, you've got this new and emerging people-centric approach to personal data. And this people-centric approach to personal data is characterized by data as a human right or as a social commons, meaning I should have control over my data, or I want to share it with my community so my community can be better. And in that model, I'm looking for agency and autonomy and self-determination and dignity and inclusion. And just like enterprises, I want happiness and value as well. So how do you as a business start pulling all of these pieces together and understanding what's going on? Using the median of the waters analogy, and thinking about all of the undercurrents and the forces that are driving these rivers together, our future will be measured not in miles, but rather in years. And the forces that we need to be looking about that are driving the industry are technology, economics, laws and regulations, culture, also known as consumer opinion, and politics. And so there's a lot going on in the technology stage, and you need to get ready for the personal information economy, in particular, new tools that are called personal information management systems and self-sovereign identity, which are technologies that are giving people more and more in control over their data. And I've got massive literature reviews, as you can see here, that will help you understand what's happening there. You need to think about the economics. As I said, there's an $11.7 trillion market value that's driving data in the marketplace. And if you just look at the personal information elements of this data marketplace, you can see that we have many multi-billion-dollar industries that are being driven by personal data and identity, including the cybercrime and fraud industry, where they expect that we'll be losing somewhere between $10.5 trillion by 2025 in the personal data space. From the regulatory space, you want to realize the organizational centric pillars, social engineering and enterprise as an asset, is also coexisting with the people centric approaches, personal data and the community as a human right, and the community resources, social commons concepts of data. When many people think about these different lenses of regulatory methods, they'll often, one, need to be aware that most countries will primarily adopt a primary pillar, like US is primarily enterprise as an asset, China's primarily social engineering, and Europe's primarily a human right with a bit of social commons. But even though they're a country or a region may take a particular focus towards one particular methodology or approach to data, all four of these views or lenses of a regulatory model are working in every country. So, for example, even in the US, you've got enterprises as an asset, that is personal data as an enterprise asset, which is a predominant method. But we now have 5 states that have adopted human rights methodologies to personal data. And we even have our social engineering methodologies too. Most commonly, one would refer to that as the credit score. And we can get, there's just so many examples that we can give with that. The other thing to keep in mind with regulatory models is there's massive amounts of new regulation coming into fold. And one of the most current ones is the up and coming Data Governance Act in Europe. But there's significantly other ones that you need to be paying attention to. And most organizations will relegate this regulatory framework to their legal department or their privacy department, and they want to make it a checkbox that goes away. The companies that are really are best in class today are embracing these regulations and realizing that it's an opportunity and a means for them to be able to differentiate themselves in the market when they combine it with their activities in that space with the other forces. On the privacy front, we need to realize that privacy is a really core concept. I put it into culture because it's about the individual. And privacy is the ability for a person to be able to choose the who, what, when, where, for what purpose, and for how long someone has physical access to them, either physical and or digital access to them. And again, this is absolutely rooted in 50 plus years of law as well, not to mention just cultural norms and expectation. So we want to be thinking about those forces as well. And how these all come together, especially in that cultural norm, is this idea that my privacy, aka the people, the individual, coexist with organizations trying to keep this data secure and do appropriate places with it. And then it's all of that's mitigated by both governmental as well as industry, as well as company compliance and and governance activities. And up until the 2020 Web 3.0 version, the tokenization age of the internet, a lot of this infrastructure was built on the consumer looking for these groups to be ombudsmen, representatives for them, and then to hope that with this faith, this trust that these groups that were managing my data would be held accountable. Now, because of these new technologies like self-sovereign identity and personal information management services that are coming into play, we're starting to imbue cryptographic trust within the industry. And again, we don't have time to go through that right now, but from a digital transformation perspective, you need to be thinking about this idea of zero trust architecture, cryptographic trust that's being imbued within the industry and society. And then the last thing you need to know is that we're bringing it all together into this new and emerging personal information economy. And so with that in mind, what do you need to do with all this? Well, as is anything else, and we've known this from Theodore Levitt in the 1960s, you need to be zealotly focused on being of service to the individual, the connected individual today. Focus on user experience, managing friction, being consistent. And this consistency element is huge, like brand, function, and expectations. Even when I was joining today's webinar, I hopped in with Hopin, and then all of a sudden the first page I was shown was another logo called StreamYard. And it took me a second to realize, wait a minute, why did I move from Hopin to this other logo called StreamYard to then brings me into this other portal called the MEF event? And there's a cognitive dissonance there that we really need to be paying attention to. We as businesses, we as business transformational leaders need to be thinking about how we're handing off our services to these other enabling capabilities to create a consistent, trusted experience that we have with you individuals. We need to embrace change and relearn. We need to strive for the identity nexus. We need to view the world through the 5 market lenses. And I'm going to go back to this concept called BOLT. You'll also see it as a BLT sandwich, or BOLT P, which is basically business, opinion, which I call culture, legal, technical, and then the privacy lenses. You need to be preparing for that. And then finally, you need to embrace a connectivity keystone strategy. So let me explain this again. We've got this absolutely awakening consumer, and you need to be of service to this individual. You need to realize and take a coin from Darwin. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but that those are most responsive to change. And because we're seeing exponential change in the market, 100 years, 30 years, 20 years, 5, maybe 10, 10 years, and then the next change, maybe 5, 10 significant fundamental shifts in the nature of the marketplace, you need to be prepared for change. You need to be thinking about and picking a choice, right? So we're at this crossroads right now. The 2 rivers have come together. We're at a confluence. And now the question is, do we let the organizational centric approach dilute the people centric approach to the point that we actually take a hard left and end up into a dystopian world where Orwell was an optimist? We let Zuboff's surveillance capitalism become the predominant right of the marketplace. We live in a world that Brazil, the movie, or Soylent Green, or Brave New World, or any of these other dystopian views that our fiction can help us view. Or are we going to take a hard right and end up in some idealistic utopia where everyone has total control of their data and they're involved in all of it? But even Huxley suggests that that is not sustainable over time. Or do we take a middle path where we actually realize that these rivers will come together and that we need to be consciously managing that and end up to what I call the identity nexus? And I believe the identity nexus is this equilibrium state of the risk to reward, value to risk ratio of individuals, enterprises, and public institutions leveraging and using personal data and identity to manage the society, both physical and digital, plus the social good and the negative and considering the negative externalities that come out of our using personal data and identity in the marketplace. I'm not an economist. I'm not a mathematician, but if you think about what Oliver Williamson did with transactional cost theory in the 70s, I think we could do something very similar to what we're doing now with personal data in the marketplace, and Oliver won a Nobel Prize for economics. I believe whoever solves this formula in the years to come will win a Nobel Prize. Now, where does this end up with your business? Well, what you need to do, in my opinion, is you need to start thinking about what I call the connectivity keystone strategy, realizing that the keystone is one of the strongest elements in any architectural element. And the 4 C's related to your connectivity, to your keystone strategy is connection, communication, commerce, and consistency. You basically do what we've been doing today in the market. You use advertising, you use third-party models, you use these rented audiences, but you want to get people over into your what we historically referred to as our owned audience, into our direct one-to-one relationship we have with our customers. Again, let's go back to the data model, my data, your data. That connection is historically what we referred to as this owned audience model. But with this now age of tokenization, we no longer can be really calling it an owned audience, because you don't own the individual owns the individual. And what we're ultimately going into is what we call the verified individual audience model through these tokenized cryptographic keys. And there's a new layer of the internet called the decentralized identifier. There are other companies that are doing it as well, like the @sign has their identifier. Data Swift has a data passport. Self-sovereign models are talking about the self-sovereign identity digital wallet, which is essentially a version of the DID or some of these other proprietary domain spaces. But ultimately, what this is going to come up to is individuals will be, when they are engaging with you and with a identity relationship with you, when they're exchanging data with you, they're not just going to give you data anymore. They're going to give you data that's going to be imbued with a cryptographic key to which they are in control with. And if they want to stop doing business with you, they can just cut it off. And so in the future, rather than you saying, hey, I've got 1 million emails in my database, you're going to say, I have 100,000 verified connections of people who have on a regular basis are giving me permission to have a relationship with them. And I can verify that cryptographically and with the tokenization agent infrastructure. And again, we don't have time to go through any more of that in detail, but be prepared for this new business metric. And then finally, you need to be prepared for being of service to the connected individual on the individual's terms, because pretty darn soon, I, as an individual in the personal information economy, and as these worlds start coming together, yes, I will need to be approving your terms of service and your privacy policies. But very, very soon, I'm going to be serving up my terms of service and my policy to you, and you're going to accept my terms of service rather than me having to accept yours, or it's going to be some co-owned relationship there. So be prepared for that, and then be prepared to learn and relearn. Now, I have a book coming up as well. I just want to throw that out. I've been co-authoring this. And working through the MEF to get this done. I should have it done. I was hopefully this month, but I got delayed with a bunch of things. So we're looking at probably August-ish, November timeframes. This book will be coming out, and it's going to be detailing about all of this that goes into the market. And so with that, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this. And if you have any questions, need any details about any of this, please reach out. James, I can't hear you.
No, you couldn't hear me, and you couldn't see me for a second as well. No. There we go. But I'm here. Michael, thank you very much indeed. That was absolutely fantastic and a really great way to round off day one. And you can catch Michael at the next Personal Data and Identity monthly meeting. PD&I is one of the 6 functional areas we operate here at MEF, and it underpins practically everything we do. So thanks for your expertise, Michael. And I look forward to seeing you in action tomorrow as well.
Yeah, I've got a couple sessions tomorrow. And as you said, thank you for that.
Do you want to showcase them? They have the opportunity. Go on.
I'm really excited. So we're having Seema Johnson from Nuggets is going to come and talk about how we combine these verified credentials with payments to be able to really power a verified payment methodology that will help be addressing and actually possibly eradicate all of this fraud that we were talking about in the previous sessions. So she's going to just have an absolutely stellar conversation, not just about the Nuggets model, but how the standard of this verified credential self-sovereign identity pieces are starting to come together, both technically and commercially. So definitely watch that one. And then right after that session, I'll be with Jay O'Sullivan from Agency 3, ISON 3 Agency, who is an expert in the emerging Web 3.0 standards, and specifically how we can use non-fungible tokens, NFTs, both for a revenue generating model, but primarily as a foundation for next generation loyalty programs. And it's going to absolutely blow your mind. It's going to be really fun. Next Monday, we do have our working group meeting with the PD&I working group. If you want to join us. And we'll be reviewing 2 white papers we're working on, a white paper for age assurance and addressing all of the regulations on that, as well as one on how to actually leverage and use these verified credentials in your digital transformation efforts. Then we've got a bunch of other stuff happening too. So please definitely get involved.
That's perfect. Michael, thank you very much indeed for your participation today. Look forward to seeing you and your speakers tomorrow. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Bye, Michael. Bye.
Bye.
Well, that's it, folks. This is the end of day one of MEF Connect's digital transformation. Thanks to all of you for joining. We've had 7 fantastic sessions in total, looking at the area of the Internet of Things. And remember, the IoT or machine-to-machine, as it used to be known, like so many things in life, was created by virtually accident by some students in the USA who simply wanted to know, does the Coke machine actually have Coke in it? And yes, that was the origin of IoT. And here we are today with 7 sessions as part of MEF Connect's digital transformation. We've ended the day today with Michael Becker on the personal data and identity side of things, because absolutely at the end of the day, identity has such a key role to play in monetization, anti-fraud, and so many other areas. And thanks to everyone who has spoken today, and indeed on our panels looking at South Africa in particular from a fraud perspective or anti-fraud perspective, and indeed a panel looking at telecoms fraud in general. Now, tomorrow takes on very much a mobile payments feel, as well as having the 2 sessions Michael talked about. I'd like to thank our sponsors, PM Connect and Docomo Digital, for making events such as this happen. This event is free and available to absolutely anyone around the world at any point, and that's all thanks to members who sponsor sessions. So we're going to be having a session from Docomo Digital looking at the area of mobile subscription bundling, because that really is the way of making mobile subscriptions truly successful and adding value, revenues, and margin. And we've also then got PM Connect coming along, looking at the 3 key stakeholder elements required to make content monetization a success, particularly with regards to mobile network operators. So stay tuned for those sessions and everything else. Just like to thank the whole MEF team backstage for keeping the show on the road today. And as I said, thanks to all the speakers, but most importantly, thanks to you, the viewers, and have some great time off wherever you might be. And I look forward to catching up with you tomorrow at the beginning of day 2 of MEF Connect's digital transformation. Thank you very much all, and goodbye for now.